chug, 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 chug.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Wizard Staff. I'm your host, Blake.
And I'm Guy.
And we are two drunk novices who like to talk about EDH. We do drink and swear, so you have been warned. Please drink responsibly when you're playing children's card games. Even though we do swear quite often, tonight it's a bit more of a touchy subject. And if you want people to take you seriously, swearing in their face is probably not good. So we're going to keep it down to a minimum.
What the fuck are you talking about? You didn't warn me about this.
Well, you're shit out of luck. All right, that's kind of it. I might throw one or two around, but never like at anybody or nothing.
It's kind of like, just for the references out there, how BoJack Horseman, one of my favorite shows, it always reserves saying fuck to once a season. And that just makes it much more powerful. So if we do swear, we're trying to be serious this episode.
Deliberate.
More
right.
Serious than we normally are, which
so
is
1%.
Rarely. Yeah.
1%. All right. All right. So, well, what are we even talking about? Well, tonight we are.
Or what are we even drinking?
Yeah, that's an even better question. Well, we are drinking. Well, I am drinking. So I was feeling like a little bit like, all right, we're going to talk about something serious. So I want to be a bit classy. So I'm drinking Four Roses small batch Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey on the rocks. But I'm not doing it properly. This is not a crystal glass. This is a mug that I drink out of every podcast, and instead of having one giant ice cube, I have like 5 really small ones. So I'm sorry, I'm not classy. I'm like mid-tier.
Mid-tier. I did not feel like drinking bourbon. I've had some unpleasant experiences with it, I feel like. Not to say like I've gotten really drunk off of it, I just hate the taste.
Yeah.
So I'm drinking wine, just some red yellowtail wine, and I'm almost out, so I was like, what do I have left? Look at that, I have some Guinness. So I'm going to finish my cup of red wine, and then I'm going to sip on a Guinness, which is probably the most unclassy thing I could drink for this kind of time.
You could do worse.
I could drink a Four Loko.
Yeah.
Hold on real quick. Let me go run to Walgreens.
No.
And have a Four Loko.
No. All right. So, tonight we are going to be discussing the January 2020 rules updates to EDH. And we want this episode to be an examination of both the problems within the Rules Committee's decision-making process and the player base's toxic behaviors that are both caused by flawed ideas. So, before we just jump right in, we're gonna wade slowly into the pool. So I'm gonna assume all of you are I'm just gonna start us off all on square one and like slowly build up. So some background here. Don't worry, I'm not gonna spend too much time, but just make sure that everyone's on the same page here. So some background. You probably know what Magic is if you're listening to this. If you didn't, I don't know how you got here. Welcome, everybody. There are many formats to Magic, one of them being EDH, or Commander. They're the same thing. They're synonyms. And the format was made by some MTG judges who, after a long day of judging, wanted to play some casual games of their own making. And then it became very popular. And over the course of like the next 10 plus years, it's slowly become what it is today.
One of the largest formats there is.
Yes.
If not the largest format.
And so the Rules Committee, the RC, is made of the 4 original founders, and they are in charge of deciding format rules and the ban list. Now, beneath them is the CAG, the Commander Advisory Group. They were formed in January 2019, about 1 year from the date of recording this right now, and it is currently made of 7 prominent EDH community members, and it is their task to advise the Rules Committee, and I want to make this clear, they have no vote in rules decisions. They are only there for a advisory role. They have no control over the ban list. So that's what is the quick get up to speed. And so now we come to current day. And the day arrives. It is January 2020, and a rules update comes out. And a large portion of it is the Rules Committee website has finally been updated to a much more aesthetically and user-friendly interface. Good job, Rules Committee. That old website was just like, unbearable. So, good job. Thank you. And then the rest of the update that wasn't about the website said this. It says, the format continues to grow in all its forms, but there's been a lot of good discussion about ways to improve and capitalize on opportunities. With the introduction of Commander-focused premier events, the number of games played outside local playgroups is rising. Similarly, more games are being played between friends in stores and homes than ever before. In terms of cards, there were no consensus threats to players' enjoyment, and we're not making any changes at this time. We continue to emphasize the importance of pre-game discussions as an important part of finding enjoyable games.
Blake, I'm confused. Like, it sounds like everything's okay. Like, you know, nothing's wrong from what they're telling me. Like, is the episode over?
Yeah, the episode's over. Just go home. We're done. No, not quite. So sometimes when no news isn't necessarily good news. And
didn't know that.
why was this update important? Well, again, we want this episode to be an examination of both the problems within the Rules Committee decision-making process and the toxic behaviors within the player base, rooted in some flawed ideas. So, again, I'm going to provide a bit more context. A few days before this announcement, a card called Thassa's Oracle was revealed in the Theros Beyond Death set. This was kind of the spark that lit the fire, because this card was heavily relevant to higher power level metas in EDH. And after analysis, a majority of the CEDH community asked the Rules Committee to ban a card called Flash. Flash is an instant that costs 1 and a blue that says you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you do, sacrifice it unless you pay its mana cost reduced by up to 2. But that is as far as I'm going to go as far as talking about Flash or Thassa's Oracle. The purpose of this episode is not to talk about individual cards and the analysis on them. A lot of much more intelligent people and their voices matter much more than ours. Those are the voices you should be listening to. The purpose of this episode is to look like bigger picture and be like, why do we only the communication between different members of the player base and the player base communicating with the CAG and the RC and vice versa. That is the purpose of this episode. So again, we're not going to be going into specific card analysis. So when the announcement came out that there were no changes and Flash not being banned, the CEDH community felt alienated and ignored. And this was a continuing history of feeling alienated and ignored. Generally speaking, the competitives have since been strategizing how to best have their voice heard and respected by the Rules Committee, and how to talk to casuals to get their support.
The way that I kind of was reading the comments, and one thing that really stuck out to me is something that I was like, red flag, no. But someone was like, let's just go to a bunch of game stores and demonstrate how powerful Flash decks are. Because it's now going to be the most top tier deck with Thassa's Oracle. And let's just curb stomp on all the casuals. And then maybe they'll think, oh yeah, let's ban Flash. That just is terrible, to put it lightly. And it is not the way that you should go about trying to ban a card, because it also just discourages people from wanting to play the game in general.
Yeah, well, that point that you just brought up wasn't in my original notes, but I'm actually glad that you brought it up because it's a talking point that a lot of people have been talking about. And the issue, I actually have an issue with this talking point because this was one anonymous comment on the casual EDH subreddit that, and I'm not trying to downplay what this person said and advocated for. It's more of the issue of this got way more attention than it deserved. Like, this was pretty much like one person, and literally, like, there was a huge thread between the original poster and someone else where they're just like, hey, I understand your concerns, like, I'm sympathetic towards your frustration, but you're basically throwing a hissy fit and you're making all of us look bad, like really, really bad, and please stop. That's not how we need to handle this. Unfortunately, like, I just don't like how this disproportionately got a voice and perspective, because it basically became an object in which people pointed at and said, this is what all competitive players in EDH are like, and use it as a symbol to and a piece of evidence to vilify them when it really is not representative. That's my piece, and so I'm actually glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I'm not trying to, like, say...
Why are you trying to destroy the format guy?
I'm sorry. I secretly hate this game.
Wow.
I don't want to do this podcast.
That would have been the biggest plot twist. It's like... Guy actually leaves the podcast. All right, getting back on track. This update came out. That was how the casuals reacted. That was how the competitive players reacted. How did the more casual players react? Well, there were numerous online casual players that generally acted in one of two ways, as far as I can tell. Either they agreed with the competitives and verbally assaulted a rules committee member online, mostly Sheldon, or they disagreed with the competitives and verbally assaulted them instead, both of which are unacceptable. To kind of synthesize this all down, like, what are the problems and solutions here? Well, problem number one, like, this is a very complicated issue, and I'm trying to synthesize everything down here. Like, as far as I see it, there are like two main problems. Problem number one, the rules committee and the CAG do not have a member to advocate or advise for a competitive EDH mindset. And then problem number two is that numerous casuals hold deeply flawed ideas that lead to toxic behavior. So those are the two. Can
you expand upon that a little more?
Yeah, I'm about to. It's unfortunately like it's multiple factors coming together, and you kind of have to address them one at a time, and they all kind of weave together to form these two problems. So now we're going to address the main issues. Jumping in, one of the first ideas is that, you'll hear CDH is only a small percentage of players, so their voice and opinion don't matter. You hear this said a lot. It's like one of the biggest talking points. And, it's true. The CDH community is, some people say 5%. For the sake of argument, let's just say the CEDH demographic only represents 1% of all EDH players, right? As a decision maker, the RC, you are obligated to hear minority voices and still seriously consider their perspective. You just have to.
I don't know if what I'm about to say kind of plays into this, but so let's say yes, CEDH, it makes up only 1%, and the problem is whether or not to ban Flash, because it will help the CEDH community. Well, if you're addressing that by banning Flash for the 1% and the 99%, you go to them and say, like, is this a problem? For the most part, it isn't, because Flash doesn't really see so much play in the casual meta. You are addressing the smaller minority group without ignoring the majority, and you're kind of able to solve the problem.
Yeah, and this is a point that a lot of people say, where it's like, Flash is not a card that casuals play with. It's not even a card that they're going to miss at all. It's, and then people try to like create the counterexample of like, oh, well, you could play Flash into like Academy Rector or Flash into the new Nyx Bloom Ancient. Nobody's doing that. Nobody is doing that. And so it is a little bit frustrating when it kind of seems like a win-win situation. Again, kind of getting back to the bigger picture, it's like as a decision maker, you have to care about minority voices. Otherwise, it's going to cause dissent. And you can like look, there's a whole host of political theory behind that, but like I'm not going to get into that. So their opinions do matter. You can't just sweep them under the rug just because they're like 1 out of 100. All right, then we're going to move on to the next talking point. And all of these issues are going to kind of weave together. It's very hard to distinguish between them. So I might end up repeating myself numerous times throughout this, but I'm going to try to keep it to a minimum. So another huge talking point you hear is CEDH and EDH are so different. Just split the format. It's actually interesting because Guy, I don't know if you noticed, but like when we had Jesse on for the Theros Beyond set review, he made some like offhanded comment. It's like, oh, like they're basically different formats. So I know for a fact, like even hearing it from him, it's like, wow, this is a very popular idea that people have. It's like one of the biggest talking points I hear. And the problem I have with it is sort of a problem I have with language where, there's the label of CEDH and the label of EDH, and it gives this false perspective, like it gives this perspective of a false binary, that there is one and then there is the other, that there is like, but the issue is that that's not true. There is no clear divide. It is a spectrum. You can play, like decks can be placed along all power levels 1 through 10. Like, I'm not going to get into the discussion of how flawed like the power level model is. Just work with me here, people. Like 1 through 10 power level, you can place decks and make decks all along that scale. And like, yeah, fewer are going to be at the 10 out of 10 end, and a lot can easily be built for the 1 out of 10 or whatever. It's going to be like skewed, but like you can still evenly space them. It's not like, oh, all the EDH decks are over here and all the CEDH decks are over here and there's a huge like crevice between the two. That just doesn't exist. This has definitely become a more popular talking point over the years. And like if we did divide the format, which wouldn't work and should never happen, like the issue it will create more problems than it will solve, because what will happen is people will start like playing in like the two divides, and then a bunch of people are going to complain, you're too competitive, you should be playing in CEDH. And then like in the CEDH like group, you're gonna be like, oh, you're too fringe, like you should be in the EDH, and it's just gonna lead to even more problems than it solves. Like, I'm kind of getting pretty theoretical here, but it's just like, wow, that just does not work. Like on a fundamental level, everyone is still playing EDH. We are one. We just have slightly different mindsets. Like if you, and I'll probably end up repeating this over, if you just like talk to a CEDH person, like you'll realize they're still playing under the same rules. They're still playing. They still love making like quote unquote like fringe like weird jank things in their given respective metas. They're doing all the same things. Like it's
their perspective of fun is just different, and that's kind of what EDH is all about. You just need to find the people that you want to have the same perspectives of fun to create the best gameplays.
Yeah. Before I get stuck in a rut, I just want to say, like, if you want people to take you seriously, don't personally attack them. Like, every single time there's a banned announcement, sometimes even when there's not, people like just really like to personally attack like Sheldon, because he's like the main figurehead of the 4 rules committee members. I find it funny. It's like nobody bashes the other like 3 rules committee members. It's just Sheldon, because he makes himself publicly like the face of the rules committee, and it's a little bit funny.
And just to kind of ask, and slightly off topic, could you name the other 3?
No. Like,
Yeah, because neither could I. And,
I mean, I can look it up in I can look
maybe-
it up
I
in
guess
10
that's-
seconds, but like off the top of my head, no.
right, and I think maybe that's also
That's
I
on
guess
purpose.
That's not part of the
That is
problem.
part of it.
Yeah, I was just curious because neither could I, and I'm feeling like it's kind of important to know, who those people are and like where their perspectives are coming from,
Well,
not just
I
Sheldon.
mean, yeah, I mean, I'll get to that, but like that is one benefit the new rules committee website has, is that it labels the names of the other rules committee members at a very visible location. But Sheldon is still going to be like the face of the rules committee because they have purposely designed it that way. So again, kind of getting back on track, like critiquing an idea someone holds, like just don't like verbally assault people. It's not going to get you far in life. Like it's kind of like the low hanging fruit. It's like the easy thing to do, and it's just gonna no one is ever swayed by you calling them an idiot. It's like, Sheldon, you're an idiot. Like, he's not going to listen to you. Like, if you do that. It just, yeah. And luckily, most people don't do it. It's just like, it kind of draws your attention. It's very easy to see. So, another talking point is the Rules Committee seems to be afraid that EDH will become a tournament format, similar to, like, Standard or Legacy or something. This banning of Flash would set a precedent of all future bannings, that they care about banning cards for the purpose of balancing the format. Because in certain statements they have said they are not interested in banning cards in EDH for the purposes of balancing the format.
Yeah, and the counter argument I'd like to make to that is, what about a card like Iona? It was a card that was just banned, and it was banned for the sense of casual play. But it's not a problem in competitive play, but now competitive players can't play with that because of, this other group of people. But it's like you're catering to one group, but you're not catering to the other. It's kind of, I guess, to play devil's advocate and just kind of show how the perspective is being skewed in the sense of more like casual mindset, not just competitive.
Yeah, like maybe I can refine kind of what you're saying, where it's like, okay, nobody's really asking you to make a perfect ban list that perfectly balances the format. That's like a really unrealistic like task to ask. No one's expecting that of you. But we are asking you to, for cards, that you need to consider them on a case-by-case basis on how they affect various metas, like Flash in competitive, like Iona in casual.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to think that the rules committee, this is like a really big hobby for them. WotC as a company has access to tons of data. They can look at what's going on in Arena, and they can look at all the formats and then kind of like pinpoint where's the problems, and then create maybe not a perfect ban list, but at least they have real data that they can just draw from, where the rules committee really just has to go off like sites and observations of what they can see, and that's kind of limited. And yes, you do have the CAG, which is kind of expanding their view, but still nowhere near as perfect as it's going to ever be. And unless if you're able to like, I don't know, kind of widen the format so that they're able to like get all of that, and then they can then say, oh yeah, really Iona wasn't a problem, or Flash really is a problem, or something like that. They're not going to be able to make the best decisions all the time, and you can't give them such shit for that.
Yeah, so that's like a good point you bring up, where this wasn't in my notes, but this can be a talking point we talk about for a couple minutes. I often hear people talk about, just get rid of the rules committee and make the ban list a responsibility of Wizards of the Coast. And this is an idea I hear people talk about a lot, and I don't think a lot of people realize just how interwoven the rules committee and the CAG members and Wizards of the Coast already are. They are already pretty interwoven. Like, certain members of the rules committee are employees at Wizards of the Coast. There are all of them frequently talk with staff members at Wizards of the Coast. Then those staff members provide the rules committee with some of their data. I know there's the line is actually pretty blurred, and not to mention the simple fact that I haven't actually mentioned yet, which is I think a lot of the player base and the rules committee included kind of view this format as homegrown, and WotC taking control of it would definitely be not accepted by a large number of the community, and would kind of be almost viewed as a betrayal almost.
Yeah, and so I'm not trying to say necessarily that WotC should take over the ban list so that they can kind of monitor the format in a quote-unquote better way. But WotC is a company that at the end of the day needs to do what's best for them and make those kind of decisions, whereas the rules committee is kind of more going off of feeling, and it's a little more it's not going to hurt a business necessarily, whereas if WotC's yeah, let's keep Hogak, he's not a problem at all, and then just so many more people are just going to stop playing and buy less things. They need to do what's best to kind of keep the business running, whereas the rules committee could make a decision, and it's probably not going to hurt WotC as much.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. This is kind of the whole idea of WotC taking over the ban list and taking over the format, I should say, is kind of a much bigger topic that not necessarily going to tackle right now, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'm still not trying to advocate for the Wizards to take over the ban list. I guess what I'm trying to say is don't give the rules committee shit for making these decisions, because they're doing something that they think is best, and it's their opinion. It's not Wizards who are doing it for kind of not a selfish reason, but it is a reason that's financially dependent. You know what I'm saying here?
Yeah, they are there is the whole concern of one entity is driven by a certain set of motives and the other is driven by a different set of motives, and each have their problems, and it's kind of at the end of the discussion, it's basically choosing between the lesser of the two evils. What do you kind of want to do? But
so it's like a spectrum.
Okay, it gets messy. It gets messy real fast, folks. Anyway, kind of getting back on track. The point that I brought up was the rules committee seems to be afraid that EDH will become a tournament format like Standard, and that this banning of Flash would set a precedent for bannings in the future. And one of the main problems I see is that EDH has grown beyond the original scope of the casual-minded founders of the rules committee, and that's okay. That is okay. EDH means different things to different people. Players should be able to play whatever power level they want. CDH players sometimes still play tournaments at LGSs, but they're not tournaments. They're it's just not the same thing. So be careful when you're talking about the word tournaments too. We're going to move on to the next talking point, which is the rules committee seems to be afraid that CEDH is solved, air quotes, and that in 6 months or so a new card will come out and break the meta again. This is the first, okay, take everything, take what I'm about to say with a little bit of grain of salt. This is the first time CEDH has been air quotes solved, and it's because of a singular card that has been warping the meta for years, and it is highly unlikely that WotC will print another singular card that will warp the format in the coming future, because WotC just really doesn't typically do that. There are some exceptions, but they typically don't do that anymore. And even if they did, you also have to consider banning that card.
Yeah, you have to Flash is an old card. Like, Flash wasn't just printed or anything. It's been around for a while, and if you look at some of the older cards of Magic, they're pretty powerful. WotC has recognized that, and WotC has recognized that they're not going to try and, top those kind of cards. They will make some powerful cards, but Flash is old and is often considered to be one of the more banned cards in the game. Just like over many formats, not just Commander.
Yeah, you're kind of getting ahead of me. That's like our last point. I'll probably come back around at that.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, but yeah, so we'll come back around to that.
But okay, but think of it this way. If you're a casual EDH player, have you heard of a card in the last 6 months that caused this kind of reaction from the Flash Thassa's Oracle conundrum? Probably not.
No.
So to consider that you most likely have heard of this problem now kind of merits some warrant to say how it's a little more serious.
Like, needless to say, like, another good point to remember in like this whole mess is that like voices online do not like reflect the average player. Like, I think if you're listening to this podcast, then it probably means that you're like a somewhat ingrained EDH player who like listens to numerous amounts of content, and just by doing that alone, you're already above like the average EDH player. Like, the average EDH player does not really actually consume that much content. Like, apparently, like, the average EDH player plays 3 hours per month according to the rules committee with info from WotC. Take that with a heavy grain of salt.
Yeah, I think what they actually kind of meant was that the average Magic player plays 3 hours of EDH a month. Because I think you have very dedicated Magic players who are in Commander and will play a lot more EDH than your average Magic player. This is a problem I have that can be discussed at a later time with how WotC kind of deals with some of their info, what they get from surveys, because I really wish I could kind of be there. And I've actually gotten into some arguments online, again, aside from the topic. But the point is that take it with a grain of salt, because if you're actually an EDH player, you're probably playing more than 3 hours a month.
So, again, it's a real big mess, isn't it?
One game normally takes more than 3 hours. Well, maybe not one game, but if you go out at least twice, you're probably getting at least 6 or 7 hours a game. Gameplay, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. This kind of just came to me, but this whole situation also just very much reminds me of how Sheldon knew that Grizzlebrand was probably going to be a problem card when it was released. And it was released, and he said, yeah, I recognize that was a very strong card, and it was probably going to be banned, but we were going to wait about like 5 or 6 months before we said anything, just so we could like actually like see and prove that, it did what we thought it was going to do, and give it some justification. And not to say that Flash hasn't been around for quite a while, but it only brings up more merit because of Thassa's Oracle, which was just printed. And in 6 months, if we really still do believe that Thassa's Oracle was only more reason for us to ban Flash, now we have the actual data to kind of like back that
some
up.
play experience,
like right now we're just
and stories.
Right. Like right now we're just saying like, yeah, you could do this. Yeah, I could do a lot of things with my EDH decks if I had like the perfect combo like in my hand, but that's not always the case. So it's like it would be jumping the gun like very drastically, and I don't know. you when you want to make a decision like this, you need to have real data, real like backup as to why, not just like theorize.
Yeah. It is like noteworthy to say that, like, you know, I'm going to be honest here, like, personally speaking, if I was in like the rules committee shoes, I would have done like a very similar thing where like the card like just got announced, people say that this is going to be problematic, and I would be like, all right, I hear all of your voices, let's all test this out for like 6 months. I want to hear your stories, I want to hear your more in-depth analysis and play experience, and then come the next like quarter or whenever they announced another ban list, it will be heavily considered. So I'm glad you brought up that Gristle brand story parallel, because I think it really serves to provide some context of, you know, in terms of time constraints, I will give them a bit of leeway for the decision that they made. Yeah.
Right. Like, you don't want to, like, I guess, make anyone too upset that they didn't get to play a certain way.
Yeah, I would rather have have
before...
players be pissed for like a long, like, for an amount of time and get some play experience and then ban the card, and then a majority of people will be like, oh yeah, that was justified, rather than preemptively banning a card and then having people complain for the end of time, we never even got to play with this card. Like, how can you know for sure? We've never even gotten to play with it. Like, you'll never hear the end of that. So, like, I mean, it's the lesser of the two evils on mine. So that's something to consider too. So kind of now we're coming back to the point that you brought up earlier, Guy, which is under the talking point of, you know, I'll especially hear this not only from other players, but from other podcasts where people will say Protean Hulk is the problem and not Flash. Again, we're not going to get into the specifics of cards, but I think this demonstrates an interesting point, which is people who are saying this are basically choosing to put their heads in the sand. Like, there are so many places online where you can read in-depth analyses by CEDH players explaining in well-written posts why Flash is a problem, and they are written incredibly well, and they're written with the audience in mind, so that the audience, mostly being casual players, will understand. And also, you also have to be ignoring the posts and videos that describe what you alluded to earlier, Guy, which is the entire history of Flash as a card, where it has a history of breaking other formats. And, you know, if a card has a history of breaking other formats, like, you know, it kind of gets a red flag, and maybe you should consider that in your decision-making process. And so it's really more of an issue, I feel, of people just kind of being lazy and sitting back and choosing to stay in their bubble and not actively listening to others or reading what others have to say. You get what I'm saying?
I totally get what you're saying. Like, if you're only just kind of, what the problem is, we're only taking one perspective and not considering, like, all the other perspectives. Mm-hmm. Any other kind of decision making, where would that be justified as, like, a good way of making your decision? Like, if that's how, I mean, I guess maybe sometimes real politics are done like that, but, like, we know that that's not, like, the
that doesn't work
way.
Well in the end.
No, right. So why is it the best way now? It's not. Maybe give, like, some benefit of the doubt, but do you think sorry. Do you think the rules committee is waiting a certain amount of time before they make a decision because of the timing?
I do.
Because okay. Because I agree. I don't think that they wanted to rush into anything. I think they wanted to make a clear, justified decision, But now it's just kind of shitty that this is, what had to happen.
Yeah.
And maybe something will come out of it afterwards, but at least we are making a proper and well-informed decision.
Another big point of why I think, all this conflict has happened is that people often only play EDH either competitively or casually. People don't often play both. Like if you play casually, like you almost always play casually. If you play competitively, you almost always play competitively. Like there's not much crossover, and so people don't see those different mindsets, and people end up vilifying and otherizing people on other levels of EDH metas. And I think like a good story is like Shivam Butt, who is a CAG member. He's super casual, and he asked like some competitive players if he could play with them, and he kind of like did a 180, and he's like, oh, I think I understand what you guys are all about now. Yeah, you guys are cool. He's like a huge like advocate for them now, somewhat.
This kind of gets, and not to say like I don't think that's a good story, because it is. I do appreciate how one person could have a certain mindset and then kind of turn into another mindset, but it kind of goes back to my point of this is all based on a feeling. This is based on like emotion and not like a financial business decision. So again, we can't really give so much shit to someone for saying one thing, because it's their experience. He had one way, thought another, and now he's, yes, advocating for Flash, but this goes into the point of what I was trying to say of how it's based on an emotion and an experience, not a financial business perspective. Shivam understands now where they're coming from based on his experience. But if not everyone has had that experience, then they can't necessarily empathize with, how someone feels. Whereas WotC would just kind of make the decision of, this is what needs to happen for the sake of our business. So we can't really give the rules committee so much shit just because, they haven't experienced what we've experienced.
Yeah, but I guess you can arguably give them shit for not trying to learn from that new perspective.
Well, yes and no, only because what if they don't have access to that experience? Like, what if they, like, again, this is like a really in-depth hobby for them. So they would really have to go out of their way from outside of their lives of maybe like a full 9-to-5 job or something else that they're doing that's not Magic. I mean, yes, we want you to kind of like give your best efforts here, but you have other lives outside of this that aren't just Magic, and you're doing the best that you can with the situation that you're in.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I completely understand what you're saying, but like my point would be just I wish more of the CAG members and more of the RC kind of did what Shivam did and be like, hey, can I like play some CEDH games with you, and just try to play within those metas and kind of understand that mindset.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree, but what I'm saying is like, what if they don't have access to that? Like, what if they went to their game store?
I know for a fact it's very easy for them in terms of like going to events every year.
Okay. I mean, okay, yeah, I guess.
Just derailed you.
I guess I don't know the other three to know that for a fact that it would be pretty easy for them.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt and trying to say that they're people.
Yeah, I definitely think that's definitely necessary. I think you always need someone who's like gonna give a certain interest group a benefit of the doubt. So I admire your efforts here, because I Because I'm trying not to be, but I'm definitely like, critical. Okay. Kind of like trying to wrap up here. I know episode has been very abstract, and I'm sorry. I promise our next episode is going to be much lighter. So trying to like
complete 180.
Yeah, it really is. So like kind of to try and wrap things up here, it's like there's this whole false dichotomy that CADH and EDH are different things. They're not. We are all the same players. We are all following the same rules. We might have different mindsets, but we are all EDH players. We are one. And all of this conflict, it's so weird, like from my perspective. It's like this whole conflict doesn't need to exist. It is so unnecessary. It doesn't need to exist right now. And so how do we move forward? It's like, so I would say to my call to action to the player base, again, we are one format. We are just different mindsets. Actively seek out different perspectives and info, and you'll find a majority of players, casuals and competitives, are kind people and are not your enemy. And also just don't verbally assault people, period. It's not going to get you far in life at all.
Whether it's magic or just life in general. Yeah. Like, that's just a really good piece of advice in general.
Yeah. And then to the rules committee and the CAG, add a devoted CEDH player to the CAG. It is your responsibility to care about all players. So care about players at the highest power level metas and make decisions accordingly. Many of the fears about making policy with competitives in mind that you have are unjustified. There is...
Sorry, like, this kind of just goes into a small thing that I've noticed in the command zone, how Josh Lee Kwai has often, or has said on a few times, that he's often felt like the CEDH spokesperson, because he is a very popular person who has had a few times where he's shown off some, like, quote unquote very powerful decks, but he's also like, I don't know anything about this. Like,
at least he's honest. Yeah,
he's being honest, but it's also like the CEDH community was kind of like, all right, who's kind of our runner-up? Josh apparently has some like really good decks, so I guess it's him.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they don't have a specific spokesperson that they can then like put onto the CAG. They kind of have to rely on just word of mouth and like what these CAG members have shown off.
Yep.
Which is unfortunate, but it's the best that they can do.
Yeah, currently. So I would, and again, you don't want to make the rules committee too large before like a bureaucratic structure becomes super inefficient. But like, do try to at least add one devoted CEDH player that can inform you and be the funnel of those voices, so you can make those decisions with them in mind. Because on top of everything that we've been saying, everything's kind of been revolving around the issues of alienation of the CEDH community and of transparency. Doing this episode has been a nightmare because I have been trying to piece together what little I can find. Like, it is through Shivam on Twitter and like Charlotte on Twitter and on Tumblr that I was able to find any information on like the going on abouts that were happening before this update. Those are the only sources I could find. It's like, you know, previous critiques before the CAG forum is like, oh, the rules committee is in an ivory tower, like we lack transparency, we don't know what they're thinking. And like, I think this was kind of like one of the first few big updates where it's like, oh, that issue is still kind of in place. We still don't know what they think. we're trying to just piece it all together. And I know, like, yesterday, within the time of this recording, Sheldon came out with a article that was previously on the Star City Games website behind a paywall for 1 week, kind of giving like his assessment or state of the format article. And I'm not going to get into it, but that you can tell like there's a few moments where like it seems a little condescending in tone. It's just a mess. Like, so like rules committee, like for your own sake, reevaluate what you find important and what is the true EDH philosophy. Peace out. That's what I can say.
With the people that you, yes, have a similar mindset in general about communication.
Yeah. It's about,
we need better communication in just
people willing to see outside their bubble.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's only going to help you, and it's only going to help the greater picture in general.
And once again, this conflict doesn't need to exist. This is so pointless. I'm hoping in like 1 or 2 years, we can look back on this and just laugh. And I think we're getting there. Like, it's just going to be very slow.
Let's hope so.
Fingers crossed.
We're going to wrap up the episode. Thank you very much for listening. We promise our next episode will
much
be
lighter.
A little more lighter.
Much more lighter.
You can find us on Spotify and iTunes. We are also on YouTube, The Wizard Staff. You can send us an email at thewizardstaff101@gmail.com. We have an Instagram and Twitter, wizardstaff101. Give us a like and comment. We hope to see you in the future, and we hope you have a great night.
Peace.